Once you're done with the analysis, it's time to go in and start exporting out all the graphics that you're going to need for the HTML document. Looking at this document, what I'd like to do is look at the top and then work our way down. One thing that I like to do is lock any layer that we're not going to be working with. So in this case, we're going to be strictly focused on this top section, meaning we're not going to use footer, page, or header. We can go ahead and select those layer groups by clicking the footer layer group, holding down the Shift key and clicking the header layer group. With all three layer groups selected, you can click the little padlock icon to lock all of those layers. Now that's something you can only do in Photoshop CS6. So if you're working with a previous version, you're going to have to go in and lock each of the layer groups independently. With that being said, looking at the top portion of this layout, we know that CSS can't reproduce this subtle pattern gradient in the background. So what we need to do is isolate a portion of it and export it out so we can use it within our CSS. Let's go ahead and zoom into this area. The keyboard shortcut to access the zoom tool is Control Space here on the Windows side. It's Command Space on the Macintosh. So here we can see this little gradient pattern background. Like I said, it can't be reproduced in CSS alone. We can use an image in CSS to reproduce most of it, meaning we don't have to export out this entire top bar. Rather, what we need to do is isolate a portion of the pattern, export that out as an image, use it as a background image, and control its repeating behavior. So if we look at this, we just need to select a portion of it. So I'm going to come over and make sure that the top layer group is selected. And furthermore, I want to go ahead and highlight the background layer because the background layer is the layer with that speckled pattern. So turning off the visibility makes it invisible. If I turn the visibility back on, you can see it, just confirming that it is in fact on this background layer. So oftentimes what people will do is come over and choose the marquee selection tool, which is a good bet. Normally the style is set to normal, and they'll just click and drag out a selection. And if we do that, I'll just click and drag. I've isolated a portion of this gradient background. I could export this out as a PNG or a GIF or a JPEG or whatever format I decide I want to use, and then in CSS use it as a background image and just have it repeat. And that would work just fine. The problem with this is, though, we're selecting too much of the image. Ultimately, we're going to be producing a larger image in terms of file size this way. And there's no need to do that. What you can do is isolate a smaller portion of this background pattern and use that, ultimately producing a much smaller file size, making a faster website. And sometimes people don't really put value in lowering the file size by 500 bytes. But you have to remember that with mobile devices out there, slow internet connections still exist, so things like that are very important. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect this, Control D or Command D on the Mac. What we really need is the pattern, and if we take a close look at this, again, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, we can see that the pattern doesn't go all the way up to the top. We don't need an image to produce white. We can achieve that easily with HTML. If we look at this even closer, we can see that we essentially have two columns of artwork. We have this gray box pattern, which is a gradient, and then we just have a column of white pixels. So that's what we really need. We need the column of the gray boxes and then a column of the white pixels. And we don't need to go all the way up to the top. So what I'd like you to do with the rectangular marquee tool selected, inside the options bar, go ahead and set the style to fixed size and set the width to 2 pixels and the height to 40 pixels. Once you establish the width and the height, you can come over and click to create a selection. Now, my selection isn't placed correctly, so I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move it around. What you want to do is you want to select one column of the grid pattern and one column of white pixels. Once you do that, you want to isolate that by placing it inside of a new Photoshop document. And the way to do that is to come up to the Edit menu and choose Copy Merged. Because if you take a look at the Layers panel, we have the background, but there's Effects, with a gradient and pattern overlay applied to it. We need to copy those as well. Copy merged gives us that ability. Go ahead and select that command. Go to the File menu and choose New. Once you choose New, it will automatically establish the width and the height for you. We're going to go ahead and drop the resolution to 72 pixels an inch, and then you can go ahead and click OK. Once you click OK, we have the new document. Obviously, it's very small, but we want to paste what we copied onto the clipboard. So we can come up to the Edit menu and choose Paste. Now, if we zoom in to this document, eventually we'll see that pattern that we're trying to isolate, and sure enough, there it is. So once you have this in its own document and it's isolated, you want to save it. You can go to the File menu, and from the File menu, you can choose Save for Web. And if you want, you can look at different variations of this graphic with different settings. I'm going to go ahead and zoom into it a little bit. After zooming into it, you may want to look at this in the 2-up tab or maybe even the 4-up tab. In this case, instead of going with GIF, I'm going to go ahead and try PNG 8. You'll notice it increases the size a little bit, but I don't need 256 colors. Honestly, I probably need about 8. If we take a look at 8, we're getting a pretty good reproduction of the original piece of artwork, and the file size is pretty small. It's 166. You may be able to drop the colors down to 4 in this case. It comes down to 143, but I think the gradient lost a few steps of gray there. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it set to 8. And with that, you can go ahead and save this document. So go ahead and click Save. Once you click Save, navigate to the desktop. Go ahead and find the PSD to HTML folder. And in there, you can go into the blank folder. And inside the blank folder, you can go into Includes. And finally, inside of there is an Images folder. And you want to go ahead and give this a name of top.png. So go ahead and type in top, click Save. Once you click Save, you've exported out that graphic. So that's the first graphic we need to isolate. In the next movie, we're going to continue to look at the layout, figure out what other artwork we need to export before we go in and start coding.